Welcome to the first episode of the new series about the unbiased history of Black slavery in America. My goal is to focus on the key elements and mechanisms that caused the tragedy of millions. In today's video, I start from the beginning. Prepare to hear the origins of Black slavery in America. The decline in Indian slavery in the Caribbean and in the Southeast came as the population of Indians was decimated by European diseases. The population decline in the American colonies, along with European treaties that forced settlement of Indians in agreed-upon nations before the Indian removals in the 1830s, meant a decline in warfare between Eastern Indian peoples. Since warfare was the foundation of Indian slavery, the Indians had few slaves to trade with the Europeans, and thus a new group of people was needed. A people from Africa. The African slave trade in the Caribbean, including northern South America, started early and had several international participants. In addition to the Spanish, there were the Portuguese, the French, the Dutch, and the British. All of these different players interacted with each other, whether boarding enemy ships to take slaves and other goods or purchasing slaves from each other. The slave trade in the Caribbean influenced what happened in North America as the Spanish, English, French, and Dutch established northern colonies and used the labor and servitude of the Black Africans. The first African slaves to be brought to the continental United States were brought by the Spanish in 1526 as part of the first attempt at European settlement in what is now the continental United States. The short-lived settlement of San Miguel de Guadalupe was founded by Spanish explorer Lucas Vázquez de Ayllón. It began when a ship set off from Hispaniola to capture Indian slaves along the southern coast of North America in 1521 and found attractive areas for settlement in what is now South Carolina. In 1526, families were brought from Spain with the intent of forming a colony and laying claim to North America's shores north of Florida for Spain. A group of African slaves accompanied the settlers. Unfortunately, we do not know where San Miguel de Guadalupe was finally established. Although the settlers thought they ventured south of the area originally explored, they may actually have been north of there. If they did go south, one guess is that the settlement was on the Sapelo Sound in what is now Georgia. The colony lasted only a few months before it was abandoned. It failed due to a series of serious problems, one of which was that slaves rebelled and then ran off. We do not know their names. We do not know where along the southeast coast they made their break for freedom, and we do not know what became of them. But I think as we remember the history of slavery in the New World, this brave group of people who found themselves left to their own devices on the shore of a continent, an ocean away from their homeland, should not be forgotten. St. Augustine, Florida, was the first successful settlement by the Spanish in what is now the United States. Don Pedro Menéndez de Aviles claimed the area for a Spanish settlement in 1565. Slaves were brought for the new colony, and among the ship's crew were some free Africans. A group of French Huguenots had attempted to form a settlement north of there, near what is now the border of Florida and Georgia, in 1562, but they were slaughtered by the Spanish on the grounds that they were heretics and had settled on land claimed by Spain. The Huguenot settlement was among the first to include a few free Africans. St. Augustine was to become an important trade point for slavery in the New World. The presence of free Africans, though few initially, was also a portent of the future, as Florida was to become the location of the largest population of free African Americans before emancipation. The other large population of free African Americans was to develop in the Chesapeake region, and that is where we meet up with the slaves who arrived in the New Virginia colony in 1619. British slavery practice was not well established at the time of the arrival of the first African slaves. It meant different things to different slaveholders and in different settlements. The model many people had to go by was that of indentured servants, who were contracted to serve a term of labor for their passage to North America, often 7 years, and were given a start on their new life at the end of that service that might include seed and a parcel of land that they could farm. So some slaves, particularly in the Chesapeake area, were treated the same way and given their freedom after some years of service. This custom, needless to say, did not last, but the free populations of descendants of African slaves in the Chesapeake and in Florida became important to American history, as these peoples were willing to help escaped slaves to freedom. A famous example is Anna Murray, a free African American living in Baltimore who helped Frederick Douglass to escape and later married him. Enslaved peoples in the early settlements in French Louisiana were culturally influenced by trade and historic events that brought many people of different cultures to the centers of New Orleans and Mobile. Spain took New Orleans in 1763 and ruled for 37 years before the city was returned to French rule. During Spanish rule, French language and culture remained the dominant. Mobile changed hands a few times, ruled by the British from 1763 to 1780, and then by the Spanish until it became part of the United States Mississippi Territory in 1813. So, like New Orleans, it has a complex cultural heritage. The revolution in Haiti in the 1790s brought free French-speaking people of color fleeing the violence to the region who were culturally different from those born in Louisiana. A great many free people of color came to live in this region before the end of slavery. Over time, there came to be people of various mixtures of French, Spanish, Native American, and African backgrounds who are called Creoles today. The above is a very short description of the complex history we should keep in mind, even as we mark the beginning of African slavery in the British colonies in 1619. This matters even today, as we understand who African Americans are and the variety of their cultural roots. African Americans are sometimes spoken of as if they are one culture, but they have many cultures and varied histories, both among those whose ancestors were brought to America forcibly and those who immigrated to the United States. What follows are some examples to explore of the music and expressions of African American peoples descended from slaves as found in the United States by way of the American Folklife Center collections and events available online. Of course, the examples we have to offer are from a period far removed from the beginnings of slavery, but I think you will see how the early history can help to bring a better understanding of examples from early ethnographic sound recording to the present day. What is also worth mentioning is the facts that Native American and African slave history are intertwined. Indians and Africans might serve as slaves in the same households or communities. Indians, sympathizing with African slaves, would also sometimes help escaped slaves if they could. I hope the first part of the history of black slavery in America interested you. In the next part, I will talk about the enslavement process, discussing the capture of African captives, their transportation in grueling conditions to the coast, and their journey on European ships to America. Remember to leave your thoughts in the comments and learn from the history.